U.S. President Biden makes a surprise visit to Ukraine as the country marks 1 year since Russia's invasion. Biden pledges $500 million of military aid for Ukraine and more sanctions against Russia. Another powerful earthquake hits near the Turkey and Syria border. At least 8 people have been killed and hundreds injured. No action again from the UN Security Council on North Korea's provocations. The U.S. blames Russia and China's veto for what it calls dangerous silence. Good afternoon. Ahead of the 1 year anniversary of the war in Ukraine, U.S. President Joe Biden made a surprise visit to the country's capital, Kyiv. Meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky, Biden vowed fresh military aid and more sanctions against Russia. The trip comes at a critical time as Russia prepares for its spring offensive. Our Song Yoo-jin has our top story.
A surprise visit by U.S. President Joe Biden to Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Monday's historic trip marks Biden's first visit to the country since war broke out last February. It also comes 2 months after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to the U.S. to meet him in person. Biden arrived in Ukraine's capital on Monday morning and was greeted by Zelensky at the Mariinsky Palace. Air raid sirens blared as the two leaders walked through central Kyiv. While giving joint remarks to reporters while standing side by side, Biden reiterated Washington's unwavering support for Kyiv.
1 year later, freedom is priceless. It's worth fighting for as long as it takes. And that's how long we're going to be with you, Mr. President, for as long as it takes.
We'll do it.
Thank you.
Biden also promised an additional $500 million worth of military assistance to the war-torn country. The new aid package includes more military equipment such as artillery ammunition, howitzers, anti-armor systems, and air surveillance radars. Biden added that the U.S. will announce fresh sanctions later this week against Russian elites and companies who try to evade existing sanctions in order to boost Russia's war efforts. Biden's Ukraine visit was tightly kept secret until the last moment, although a trip to neighboring Poland was his agenda for this week. After departing Kyiv in the early afternoon, the president arrived in Poland Monday evening to begin a 2-day visit. There, he plans to meet Polish President Andrzej Duda and hold talks with the leaders of NATO's 9 eastern flank nations. 송유진, Arirang News.
34 countries have called on the International Olympic Committee to maintain a ban on athletes from Russia and Belarus ahead of the Paris Games in 2024. According to the U.S. State Department on Monday, countries including South Korea, the U.S., and host country France released a joint statement expressing concerns over allowing the two countries' athletes to participate under neutral flags. They questioned the feasibility of Russian and Belarusian athletes competing as neutrals when they are directly funded and supported by their states. They also cited strong links between Russian athletes and the Russian military as another major concern. Just 2 weeks after the devastating earthquakes, another powerful quake slammed the Turkey and Syria border. At least 8 people have been killed and hundreds injured. Shin Se-byuk has the latest.
Another big earthquake with a magnitude of 6.3 struck southeastern Turkey and northwestern Syria Monday, the same regions that were devastated by a deadly earthquake 2 weeks ago. At least 8 deaths have been reported, 3 in Turkey and 5 in Syria, while hundreds of others have been injured. Turkish Vice President forEradicating said the latest quake is not an aftershock from the February 6th earthquake, but rather a new, massive one, and added nearly 30 aftershocks have been detected so far. Monday's earthquake was centered in Turkey's Hatay province, where a rescue operation is underway. For many of those that are still coping with the aftermath of the initial earthquakes for 2 weeks, even the slightest tremor has them leaving their homes.
Same fear, the same feeling of unease. We cannot enter. If we do, we cannot stay. We don't know what to do. God have mercy on us. There is nothing to say.
In Syria, the earthquake has resulted in power outages and disrupted telephone and internet services in the affected regions of the two countries. A number of buildings collapsed as well. According to Reuters, the earthquake was felt as far away as Egypt and Lebanon. Meanwhile, with operations focused more on the survivors, authorities say more than 1 million people have been left homeless since the February 6th earthquakes. The death toll from those quakes has also surpassed 47,000 people. Experts also say the aftershocks could last from months to years. 신세벽, Arirang News.
The earthquakes in Türkiye came at a time when its economy is already on the edge. Rebuilding the destroyed infrastructure there is expected to cost tens of billions of dollars. Kim Hyun-sung reports.
After the devastating earthquakes, Türkiye now has to deal with the economic aftershocks. The damage from the recent earthquakes may cost close to $84 billion. That's close to a tenth of Turkey's GDP last year. The earthquake will also have a knock-on effect on the country's agricultural, construction, and tourism sectors. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development says the earthquakes could set back Turkey's GDP this year by 1%. Some of the damage is slightly harder to measure.
Their work relationships have been destroyed, which means that there is going to be also in the short term this loss of productive capacity. These people are not going to be working where they used to work. So there will be this opportunity cost that the country is going to suffer from.
The quakes came at a fragile time for the Turkish economy. According to the professor, the country's heavy inflationary pressures and high interest rates had pushed many down the socioeconomic ladder. Now, with government spending pooled into repairing the damage, the situation may get worse.
On the fiscal side, we see the government, having these big plans of, rebuilding these cities and investing into these cities. So that's going to create more fiscal pressure on the inflation that might exacerbate the conditions.
The earthquakes may also change Turkish political discourse. Elections are coming up this May, with incumbent President Recep Tayyip Erdogan under heat for the government's disaster response. Some from his party have voiced to push the election dates back a month in the wake of the earthquake, possibly hinting their unease at their chances of winning another term. As for now, the elections will stay as scheduled for May 14th. But the memory of one of the most disastrous events in the country's recent history will most likely remain in the voters' memories as they cast their ballots. And whoever wins the race will face many challenges at this critical time for the Turkish economy. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
No action again from the UN Security Council on North Korea's provocations. The U.S. blames Russia and China's veto for what it calls dangerous silence. Lee In-jin has the details.
Following North Korea's launches of 3 ballistic missiles, an intercontinental ballistic missile on Saturday and 2 short-range ballistic missile launches on Monday, the United States called for the first UN Security Council meeting of the year on North Korea. On Monday, the U.S. proposed that the UN Security Council condemn the North and hold the regime accountable for its provocations.
The United States condemns in the strongest possible terms the DPRK's February 18th and February 19th launches of 3 ballistic missiles. This included the DPRK's 9th international ballistic missile launch since the start of 2022.
But the 15-member body failed to come to a consensus due to opposition from China and Russia. The pair used their veto power to block the U.S. proposal. Moscow and Beijing had previously vetoed proposals at all 10 Security Council meetings last year that specifically discussed North Korea's missile threats.
Exclusively pursuing and piling on sanctions will only lead to a dead end. To bring the Korean Peninsula issue out of the predicament, all parties should adopt the right approach to non-proliferation and avoid double standards.
With China and Russia standing in opposition and accusing the United States of escalating tensions and provoking North Korea, the Security Council failed to come to a consensus. The U.S. ambassador called the body's lack of action worse than shameful, highlighting the graveness of the danger these missile tests bring not only to Asia, but the entire world.
The reality is that those who shield the DPRK from the consequences of its exploratory missile tests put the Asian region and entire world at risk of conflict.
The last time the Council took action on North Korea was when it adopted a resolution to strengthen sanctions in December 2017 on Pyongyang's ballistic missile and nuclear weapons programs. After Monday's Security Council meeting, 2/3 of the body's members and South Korea issued a joint statement condemning North Korea's recent missile launches. Yoon, Arirang News.
South Korea's defense strategy for the next 15 years will be focused on ramping up deterrence against North Korea's increasing nuclear threats. Seoul's defense ministry said Tuesday that the top confidential document detailing the plans was soon to be presented for approval from President Yoon Suk-yeol. It is expected to focus on strengthening South Korea's three-axis deterrence system that seeks to preemptively strike, defend, and retaliate to threats from North Korea, as well as tackle the growing use of unmanned aerial vehicles. The defense guideline will cover the country's approach to security challenges, such as climate change and the strategic competition between Washington and Beijing. It will also address alliances and solidarity and will promote innovation and resilience. President Yoon Suk-yeol has called for eradicating corrupt labor unions at construction sites, saying illegal activities negatively affect citizens.
폭력과 불법을 보고서도 이를 방치한다면 국가라고 할 수 없습니다. 불법 행위를 집중 점검 단속하고 불법 행위가 드러나는 경우에는 법에 따라 엄정하게 조치해야 합니다.
Speaking at a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, President Yoon in particular addressed illegal activities like demands for money and employment and interference with the construction process. He says such actions cause delays as well as poor construction and called on other public and private organizations to step up to help the government stop illegal activities. He also re-emphasized his drive to reform labor practices in general, calling on large labor unions to abide by the government's request to improve transparency by disclosing their accounting books. The number of people employed in South Korea's manufacturing sector saw the first on-year drop in January since October 2021. According to Statistics Korea on Tuesday, the total number of people employed in manufacturing sector last month dropped 35,000 on-year to roughly 4.4 million. Workers aged under 60 years old suffered a far bigger drop of 126,000, but the number of workers aged 60 and above increased by 91,000. Analysts are forecasting that the overall decline will continue due to the recent downward trend in production and exports. Consumers in South Korea are feeling the heat from rising prices amid surging public utility fees like electricity and gas bills. According to a survey conducted by the Bank of Korea this month, consumers believe inflation will average 4% over the next 12 months. That is up 0.1 of a percentage point from January and marks an increase for the second straight month. The central bank also attributed the rise to increased consumer prices last month and a hike in public transportation fees slated for this year. The composite consumer sentiment index for February came to 90.2, down 0.5 point from last month. A figure below 100 means the public is more pessimistic than optimistic about the economy. After 3 years of pandemic, Seoul's popular shopping district, Myeongdong, is seemingly bustling again with a new group of tourists from Southeast Asia. Lee Soo-jin has the story.
The shopping area of Myeongdong in central Seoul was hit especially hard by the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting drop in tourists from China. Chinese tourists made up nearly 34% of all tourists to Myeongdong in 2019, but their numbers fell sharply to 3.3% last year. Tourists from other parts of the world are now filling the void. The proportion of travelers from Southeast Asia, for instance, more than doubled from 13.1% to nearly 27% over the same period. Shops and restaurants in the area are adapting to their new customers. Behind me, you can see signs that have been translated, and you can also hear street vendors calling out in languages from all over the world. Many shops also show the halal certification mark, which ensures that the product is safe for Muslims to consume.
As a tourist, I feel like I can try more of Korean food, not just typical halal food that you...
Restaurants selling Korean food have also diversified their menus so that visitors with certain dietary requirements can try traditional Korean cuisine. One such restaurant is Hangaram, a restaurant run by a traditional Korean food expert.
Since foreigners from all over the world come, we have decided to cater to their dietary needs. We created a harmony between certified halal food and traditional Korean food, and we also offer vegan options.
I'm coming from the U.S. There's a lot of Korean restaurants also in the U.S., but it's very rare to find like very traditional type of food. My mom, she likes to eat a little bit more like vegetarian, less. So we did have like an option for that.
With the influx of new tourists, the district is beginning to regain its vigor from before the pandemic. The vacancy rate of Myeongdong's small-sized properties had been as high as 50.3% in the fourth quarter of 2021, but has recovered to the point where by the fourth quarter of last year, just 21.5% of small properties stood vacant. However, experts say that more needs to be done for the area to fully recover.
If the economy continues to improve and tourists keep coming, Myeongdong will survive. But for vacancy rates to recover completely, it'll need to do something different.
The experts said this includes new initiatives such as creating more things for visitors to see and do. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
K-pop sensation BTS has reached 700 million views on YouTube for their music video Save Me. The video reached a milestone on Tuesday local time, marking the group's 11th music video to do so. The music video was released in 2016 as part of the Most Beautiful Moment in Life Young Forever album. Meanwhile, BTS member Suga is set to hold a solo world tour across 6 countries starting in April this year. This year marks the 50th anniversary of South Korea's forest rehabilitation plan. The aim was to revive the country's mountainous areas, which had become barren following the Korean War. Chung Eun-ju has the details.
After the Korean War, South Korea became a barren land where it was difficult to find even a single tree on its mountains. This is because trees were cut down and used for fuel due to shortages. And with no trees to hold the rain, summer flooding became more frequent and made life even more difficult. In 1973, South Korea started the Forest Rehabilitation Plan to revive the country's woodlands and began planting trees on a large scale. Poplar and locust trees were planted because they grow quickly in desolate land. Larch and pine trees that need to be grown for longer but have high value, and trees that can produce fruit were also planted. After planting a total of 10 billion trees over a 50-year period, South Korea has seen an increase of more than 15 times in the amount of trees per hectare, from 11 cubic meters per hectare to 165.
50% of the devastated mountain areas are completely restored, and the forest area or the volume of trees has increased by 29 times.
The era of a forest renaissance has begun. People can now enjoy the dense, green, beautiful forests that have been well maintained for 50 years.
The forests that have been nurtured for 5 decades are expected to provide economic benefits and places for people to find an escape from city life. 정은주, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Dozens have been killed in Brazil's southeast following floods and landslides that tore through coastal towns. At least 36 people have been killed and hundreds have been displaced in São Paulo state since the weekend. 35 of the deaths were in San Sebastião and one person died in the neighboring town of Ubatuba. But the death toll is expected to climb as rescuers attempt to find survivors trapped in some 50 buildings that have collapsed in the wake of the disaster. The governor of São Paulo has declared a state of emergency in 5 of its hardest-hit coastal towns. According to officials in San Sebastião, the floods were triggered after the area saw a record 600 millimeters of rainfall in just 24 hours. Meanwhile, carnival events in affected areas have been cancelled. Turning over to the United States, where one person has been killed and 4 injured in a shooting along the New Orleans iconic Mardi Gras parade route. The incident took place on Sunday night local time at the popular Krewe of Bacchus parade, a popular run-up festival to Mardi Gras. According to authorities, the suspected shooter, who was armed with 2 guns, was taken into custody just moments after shots were fired. It's still being determined whether another person was involved. The person killed was a teenage boy, while a 4-year-old girl was among the injured. The Mardi Gras festival is set to take place on Tuesday. Staying in the United States, as a record number of guns were seized at airports across the country in 2022. The U.S. Transportation Security Administration says that last year, 6,542 guns were found at airport security checkpoints. Approximately 88% of these were loaded. It's the most guns seized in a single year and is an increase from the record 5,971 guns seized the previous year. Airport gun seizures have increased every year since 2010, with the exception of 2020, when COVID-19 restricted air travel. Passengers caught with guns mostly claim to have forgotten they were carrying a firearm. Guns can be taken onto planes, provided they are unloaded and placed in checked baggage. And finally, those suffering from paralysis due to a stroke could soon be able to regain some movement. This is according to preliminary results of an innovative treatment published in Nature Medicine on Monday. Researchers from the universities of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon implanted electrodes along the spinal cords of 2 people. The implants sent electrical stimulation when they tried different activities. One of the patients managed to eat a steak without help for the first time in 9 years, while the other saw improvements in reaching out their arm. Although it's the first success in addressing such conditions in stroke patients, more research is needed. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Again, we need the right gear for today's late winter cold weather. It felt sub-zero all day in the capital yesterday, but will be slightly higher this afternoon, while temperatures will be similar to a couple of notches lower than yesterday in southern parts of the country. And along with sunny spells and cold wind, a dry weather advisory has been issued in Seoul, Gyeonggi-do, and the east of Gangwon-do province, so please drink plenty of water. Meanwhile, Jeju and the south coast were under strong wind advisories this morning. Most regions had a sub-zero start this morning, and afternoon highs in most parts are hovering in single figures. Mostly sunny skies with normal to good air quality are in the forecast all day today. Definitely bring an extra layer if you will be out later. Then a warm-up is on the way ahead of a mostly dry week. After that, there will be a big warm-up for next week, taking us to double-digit afternoon highs in the capital region. Meanwhile, there is some precipitation in the forecast in the east of Gangwon-do and Jeju at the end of the week. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of the day.